Today, I have the pleasure to have with me Marion Meyer. Marion is Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer at BayWa. BayWa is a German company, Munich-based. Originally, they were born to support domestic agriculture, but later on they diversified into construction and energy, lately in the renewable field. But definitely Marion will give us more details. So Marion, welcome on the stage.
Alberto, thank you very much. So it's my pleasure to introduce BayWa company. BayWa is actually a over 90 years old company based and headquartered in Munich, but with a especially European and global footprint. And we're busy actually starting as a basically trading company, big distribution company, developed into being a big solutions provider, actually active in the fields, as you mentioned, in energy, agriculture, and building materials. The total revenue of the company, recently published, is 17 billion euros. And we have over 20,000 employees, where there's a majority based in Germany, as we have a huge distribution organization in Germany, but actually the whole activity spread also around the world. So there's, especially in the international agri trading, in energy, renewable energies, and the fresh produce activities, a footprint which is quite international.
So I think that is an interesting overview, because again, there are a lot of very interesting companies worldwide that most of the time are not perfectly known, and one of the goals of this conversation is also to introduce them. Obviously, the focus is not just introducing company, but we have a very, very specific area of discussion and attention, that is anything related to the magic word of open innovation. Again, open innovation is today's buzzword. Everybody's using it. Some of them in appropriate ways, some of them a bit less inappropriate way. But again, beyond the open innovation concept, there is the fact that today corporates can no longer innovate exclusively internally, but they need to look outside, and particularly they need to look to the area that is represented by these new innovation vehicles that are startups and scale-ups. In order to try to map what is fall under this open innovation concept, we typically use a framework. That is the one that we are about to present over here. And again, is not comprehensive by definition. Is not written in the stone. Actually, we update this framework every 3-6 months, because we find out that something has changed and something is evolving or something is popping up. But substantially, the word of interaction between startups and corporates involve different, let's say, areas or models or ways of interaction. That might be ranging from the left is, first of all, understanding and sitting closer to the largest tech cluster in the world, namely Silicon Valley and Israel, but today also other ecosystems are worth of attention. South Korea is one of them, Latin America, Middle East, again. And also Europe itself, we have definitely more and more innovation coming out from Europe, from multiple cities, what we call startup hubs. And so that is what we call outpost antenna, having a presence in the innovation places of the world. Then more and more, also the role of employees has changed, and is more ingrained into the open innovation formula. It might sound a bit odd that since we are looking outside, we look also inside, but we see more and more entrepreneurship programs that are designed to involve external sources of innovation, single entrepreneurs or startups. Then there is an area that is pretty broad, that falls under the concept of innovation lab. There are the traditional corporate accelerators, the newborn venture builders, startup studios, substantially trying to work with early stage concept and build them up. Multiple modes. Then there is what we call venture clients, substantially looking at external solution in order to initiate partnerships using procurement style, but mostly entering into sort of strategic partnership. And then we move forward in a, let's say, deeper involvement of the company through investments, that might have a specific vehicle, it's corporate venture capital, or might be done off balance, up to the final act when you find something very, very strategic. You might trigger the M&A, you might plug the M&A trigger. And so that is the overall map that we use. I would like to try to use it as just as a generic reference to analyze what you are doing in BayWa. I know that what you do at BayWa Venture is a subset of more activity that are run at corporate level. But I think it might be good, interesting to know what you guys are doing. And also, is it quite interesting to know the background, when you started the innovation journey. Again, there is not an exact date, and is a process. But then when the company got make definitely a further move into the open innovation play.
A very good question. And as you said, there's no time a particular starting point for innovation in particular, because hopefully, if a company has a long history and tradition like ours, it had to be innovative in a way throughout the days, because otherwise you're not able to change and to adopt and show flexibility. And maybe to add this for the introduction of BayWa, as we're active in a lot of areas where we serve basic human needs, which is about heating, mobility, eating, things like that. I think there are some basic trends all the time which can be addressed by the company, which are addressed to the company, and that's why we need to be open to pick things up and maybe to also drive it ourselves. But becoming a little bit more particular to the open innovation question, we're quite open. I need to say the company size like that, I'm always also internally saying there should be a lot innovation activities, not only a dedicated team, and that's where innovation takes place. So hopefully a lot of like process innovation, product innovation, customer innovation should also be on the mind of different parts of the operations all the time. But in particular, of course, as other companies to drive innovation forward, we also said like we need to have some dedicated initiatives. And actually to say one thing in maybe also respect to picking one of our core segments, agriculture, is the company started working with startups with having a joint acceleration program together with our Austrian daughter company or sister company partnering the RWA and BayWa, where we did an acceleration program, watching out for startups and worked together, brought organization and startup teams together for a joint development project. And it, in a way, also ended up in some investment of that. And the following, we thought about how do we start and enrich this activity even a bit further. And that's actually landed into one of the initiatives I'm hosting here at the BayWa Corporate Headquarter. We call it BayWa Corporate Innovation, and the current setup was built up from 2019. And actually what we do is we have two core perspectives on innovation we're dealing with here in that initiative. And that's not invented by BayWa, but I love to pick that up. The perspective of inside out innovation and outside innovation, to be described as inside out is, you can call it company building. That's a big headline. I think you have to start working on concepts and bring that way forward. And if it ends up into a company and in the growth of the company, that's a brilliant thing if that could be done successfully. But actually we get started in having a lot of ideas in the company and filling the gap to preserve a dedicated team, which is able, not as a sidekick and just as a project word, to work a little bit on projects, but to really foster maybe new business model innovations, which can then afterwards, if they are successfully transferred to the operations, or it can be a spin-off, or let's see. We're a work in progress, so I hope we can bring some things here further. The second aspect is the outside-in innovation, and that's actually particularly what you were referring to. We wanted to pick up what we already did within this structured innovation program and work with the startups. There's a lot of innovation taking place outside the corporates, which we love and we would love to embrace. And I think it's core for the companies to get transparency, what is happening out there, what kind of innovations and developments might be something to be picked up and get clicked to the operations for a joint benefit. And of course, if there's interesting startups or there are other startups which we can, aside from helping them develop, also be an interesting funding aspect. So we're open for funding, and that's why we also, as part of that innovation, are hosting the BayWa Venture as a small corporate venture capital vehicle that is able to invest into startups. So actually, we're trying to cover a lot of the different activities you were mentioning, and trying to orchestrate that in a way which is quite of a benefit for the company as well as for the startups.
No, I think it's pretty clear, and I think that again, going back to our framework, your activities that you refer as inside out are the one that we put under the Innovation Lab Venture Builder concept, mostly trying to develop innovation from inside. And we will would like to get more details in terms of what are the sources, what are the deal flow, how it's structured. And on the other side, the outside in is something that is activities with external startups that might lead to partnerships. That is what we call venture client, or to investments. That's when you use your own vehicle. And then also we will go into more details. But I'd like to develop further a concept that you mentioned at the beginning that I liked a lot. Again, you say, we are a company that is 90 years old. So we cannot assume that innovation just started 2 years ago. Actually, the company originated from an act of innovation. And what we typically, I think one of the concepts we can look at open innovation is a sort of a rebirth of the company entrepreneurial spirit. That's, I believe, what can be labeled today as open innovation. Again, innovation is always happening, but mostly incremental. And now I think with the open innovation concept, we are pushing the idea that the company need to go back to have a more radical innovation, because they need to have a more entrepreneurial attitude and approach that may lead them farther from where they are today, because that is something that is required from the concept. Just wanted to go back to one concept that you said. I think it was very relevant. But let's dive in the two concepts, inside out and outside in. Let's focus on the inside out. So company building, venture builder. How does it work in BayWa? Where the ideas comes from? What is the selection process? When do you decide to start working hands-on an idea? How do you kill them if they are not working? Again, all of these are questions and topics that we are in a perennial discussion with most of our corporate clients, because it's pretty relevant.
Yeah, again here, very good question, because actually, if you start doing something like that, you have a lot of very nice, as I call it, headlines to say we're going to do a company building. And of course, usually people have some success stories in mind, they have read about it, etc. And one of the questions when starting is, what was the reason why to start a company builder or venture building? And actually, I try to put it into the concept of when we're not successful if we just build something, but we have to deal with what exactly is the reason why we're doing that, what kind of innovations are we talking about, and what kind of innovations are maybe out of scope for these initiatives. Why am I saying that? Because innovation is quite a broad word, and as I said, there might be way more things to do. So first of all, one of the biggest reasons why we started this, I'm also heading the corporate strategy department, and naturally also strategy goes along with, you see new market trends, things to do, and maybe also juggling idea. And then there's operative business, where there are things that they're going to pick up, of course, and I think very successfully as well. But there might also be ideas where everyone finds it beautiful, but there's a lack of time, capacity, maybe option, but maybe also mandate to take care of that, because there's operational business to develop. There might be targets to achieve. And then there are some concepts which are on the desk, and you said, like, when there is time and someone will have time, it might be something to think about. And then they sleep for a while. And the same is also from the strategy department. You might find ideas and things which are beyond the existing activities, but they fit into, of course, the BayWa business scope. I think that's a must. So that's the reason why we said is, let's build a small team where the whole capacity is dedicated in driving, and that's a second scoping, business model ideas, because process innovation, marketing innovation, it's all a fair thing to do. But in that particular case, business model ideas forward. And why the business model ideas? Because a sort of like innovation team is able to drive an idea themselves, like a founding team. So you might be able to be on top of your topic, and like a founder, be able to think and question: is there a problem solution fit? Is there a possibility to earn money? Can I bring things forward, etc.
So just a question here, because you mentioned small team. How many people do you are in this company building team?
Yeah, we do have 3 venture architects, what we call them. And the first actually task was, before just juggling a lot of ideas, was actually with the team is developing an innovation process for this venture building by themselves. So how do we look at ideas? What type of criteria do we need to check boxes if it's interesting enough? And of course, that's more than one, and that's more than one after timing. And what we develop is actually an innovation process with some decision gates, ending actually up into a final decision gate where it then can, if it now then develops further, might be out of the innovation team and might be then a separate activity to a certain extent. So when it gets mature or it gets funding or something like that. So we do have a dedicated process on the one hand side. We do have some principles, how also that was nailed down, how to develop things and how do we work, what is the approach. And one of the things, part of the principles you already mentioned is, for instance, be open for ideas and don't look for the problems and hurdles, but look for, do they solve a problem? Do they provide a solution? Be open for co-working, what resources and capabilities might be interesting to address here. But also something like, be the first one to kill your baby, even if you like it, but be open if there are boxes which I said, like, the idea is nice, but there is a not now effect, or KPIs or metrics like business potential do not fit. Then don't wait until someone relieves you and say, like, I'm going to say no, or I'm going to say yes. You're the founder. Is it still worth it you dedicate your time on this project? And if yes, go for and fight for it. But if no, then you're the one to stop it.
Regarding on this topic, because this is a discussion I just had this week with another corporate that is about to set an entrepreneurship venture builder program. And one of the biggest hurdle is how to say no, how to kill the project that are not worth to be continued. And most of them exactly are at that point, because again, the process is a filter, and you are supposed to filter something. You should not filter something because this is a granted expectation. That's something that we recommend. Don't set up an expectation in terms of numbers, because they will, at a certain point, will force you to maintain alive something that is not worth of. So one potential expectation or process like this is also that you are going to come up with nothing, because nothing was worth of. But obviously, it's difficult to a certain point to kill the baby, because it's your baby and there is a lot of expectation, a lot of work behind that. And typically the recommendation that we give, and there's actually something that we've been shared with many other corporates, I think Bosch Accelerators, I think is interesting benchmarks in doing this, is to have a very precise criteria and KPIs that project should respect in order to be moved forward. And in this way, the decision comes more naturally, because it's not a call, a sentiment call, but it's something that is based on certain parameters you do not fit, you know it, and you should unplug yourself rather than me telling you that you are not worth it. Can you give me a bit more details how you address this? Because I think it's one central and front and center topic.
Yeah. So I think first of all, I think that's the most important thing. Be aware that you have to ask yourself the question, not in theory, but with every project you start. So, and the second thing is also, well, think in steps, because if you define some key metrics upfront for the end result, you might kill nearly every idea. And I think successful entrepreneurs would have said, if I would have known what I know now about the business, I would never have started it. But it's been successful. So trying to avoid this too much, and as for instance, you don't start initially with, first of all, the business plan, but maybe also more with really the solution and the offering and the customer ideas, is awareness that you need to find some metrics, and then you need to define some KPIs for the different stages of the innovation process. So we have two big stages within as part of the venture building process. One is make the case, and that has different phases in between where there are gates. And then the second one is what we call incremental funding. That's the first time when some money is dedicated to the project. And that's where the next decision gates comes to. And of course, we have some major KPIs, which I think you can address to nearly every project. But actually, in particular, you need to set up the relevant KPIs for each project and for each gate. So if you develop a software platform idea, for instance, I think there might be some additional KPIs which are not the same as if you build up maybe a new tool or distribution model. So I think it's defining that as part of the process. And I mean, like, stopping something is always of course difficult. But how to handle KPIs is the second thing, because if you stick just too strict to the KPIs, you don't want to run the risk to say, like, just because there was not a green light on a certain box, but the rest was promising, we didn't work on. So I think looking at the KPIs, you can also be able to maybe say, like, there's enough good on some KPIs. The question is, can you adjust or adapt for the not fitting ones? And the balance is, of course, to not go on and try to heal everything, but to find the right moment if maybe too many KPIs are not in the right direction. And I have to say, I don't want to be here too wise, because of course, as said, the way we're doing it right now is also a young development. We try to learn a lot from existing parties, also collaboration partners who already developed a lot, and try to embrace that in our process. So we already had, of course, some projects we stopped very early, and we actually celebrated it with having drinking a beer on it, symbolic wise. But of course, there will be some of these challenges also coming to us, which we haven't already fully experienced, I have to say. And so I hope we will then find the right moment to handle it right. But it's not where you can say that it's an easy thing to do. I think that's one of the...
No, not at all. And I think there are no silver bullets that you can just say, and that's how it works. But it's important at least to understand the process, and also to adjust the process based on what you've learned. And just another question about this company building process. How many ideas do you select? And how much do you filter down? Where this idea come from? There are strategic ideas coming from strategy department, ideas coming from employees. If they are coming from employees, how do you solicit employees to submit ideas? Do you have an entrepreneurship structural program, open calls? How does it work?
Well, basically to say, like, ideas are coming from everywhere, and so far we hadn't had the problem to make that, or the need to make a big ideation call into the company, because actually, as I said, there was existing ideas and a lack of capacity, maybe, which were maybe born from the strategy department, where we said, like, let's see that I think in a lot of companies, ideation is maybe not the problem, but the way of how to proceed best with them. So at the moment, we, of course, were dealing with that. We said, like, we always have to have way more ideas in the first stage of funnel to be able to bring some parts of them in the next one, and then in the next one, and to make sure that you have the different stages of the funnel alive. So if the idea funnel dries out, and if you have to stop something later on, you won't be able to pick up the next one. So where are the ideas coming from? A lot of ideas coming actually from also market research topics that we are active a lot in the market, what's going on in connection with strategy work with our operations, but of course also with the branch. So what's dealing with the branch, and we're looking also in trends and actions and things they're doing. So sometimes then you evolve ideas. So that's one of the sources. There are ideas which are transmitted via colleagues also from the operation, where in a joint way that they say, like, I do have nothing, maybe no one taking care of it, but I think that would be something interesting, and it might be a good thing, but it's fully on us if we pick it up or not. And I think that's one of the 2-3 major funnels. So strategy, operations, and market. Generally, we said when setting it up, I think this initiative should be open also for hosting entrepreneurs which are not part of the department. So if there's someone from the operation having an idea, and also an owner, a venture architect would say, like, I would love to drive it forward, and we make the process accessible for the people and help and host and doing sparring. But it's not a call for an entrepreneurial program. So we're open for that, and we keep that a lot in a very pragmatic one-to-one. So if I have a business owner and he would address it to me, would say, like, we would be in support and helping with that, but we're not running like a call for entrepreneurial programs at the moment. Might be something later on.
Yes, so just to wrap it up, you don't have a structured entrepreneurship program. The ideation mostly comes from strategy department. That is actually is the home of BayWa Venture. It's strongly linked to that. Market research, market insight is something that we see also in our experience most of the time. That is another powerful source of ideas, and that might be ideation coming from colleagues from operation, but it's still not structured in a structural entrepreneurship call for ideas program. By far, you are open to host.
Maybe to add here, so by this corporate innovation program, how we are running this, there is a sort of, I don't know if I would call it entrepreneurial program, but also we're working on ideation and concept work program, which is in support of ours, hosted by also HR. So there are different initiatives also which are driving ideas, but on the ownership of corporate innovation at the moment, it's a dedicated team open for any collaboration, but not a structural program.
Okay, well, that makes sense, and maybe it can be evolved in the future. Can be structured again. We're not. One of the reasons we are having this conversation, there is not silver bullets, there are not benchmarks, there are a lot of experience. Some of them have something that works, and some of them have something that doesn't, and so they need to be changed. And that's important to share insights. And how many initiatives are you able to run per year in terms of venture building? How many are you able? Again, I know that you're filtering down through the staging gate, but how many do you start on average, and how many typically come to the end?
Well, as I said, typically coming to an end, I think we're still hoping to get the experience. As I said, it's like the first 20 years old whiskey. I think some of them process already have to come to that stage where we said like, so how can we deal with them? I'm honest on this one, but depends a little bit, of course, how many ideas will be dealt in first stage, and if they are stopped on this one, you can discuss. We were able to accelerate more ideas because there was an ending at a certain point of time. I would generally say like 2 to 3 ideas per team member is the ones they are in stage 1 or 2, bring it to the next phase, able to be handled. But at a certain stage, like especially if it goes to closer to what we call incremental funding, it will be less and less, and at that time, usually a venture architect is fully dedicated on one project.
So essentially,
I would say maybe 4 to 6, and hopefully if one of them goes further, that would be a good two. Fine.
There are healthy ratios. Again, what I got is then you have 3 venture architects. I like that. Actually, I like the way you define them. And these venture architects typically deal 2-3 ideas each in the early phases, and typically they will focus on one to be move further on, because I think this is what is the bandwidth of typical resources. So it makes sense. Perfect. I think it's been a good deep dive on the company building part. Now I would like to move you outside. So for the outside in part of your business, that's what we call venture client and investments. Can you tell us what is your approach over there?
Yeah, for sure. So dealing with startups, I think, as you also mentioned in the intro a little bit, there are 2 aspects, maybe to sort it a little bit in that way. So one of this is that we say like we do want to do collaboration and also in a way co-creation with startups. As there is, as we are a strategic partner and a corporation, we have a running business, and it is very interesting for us and of benefit also for some startups to evaluate whether whatever the startup has evolved or invented so far could be of use for our operations. And can be adopted. And if it's to be adopted, you might also see the operation maybe as a client for the startup. So there are many ideas where we said like working together might be an interesting thing to do. And there are opportunistic things where we just get addressed and say like, oh, they're doing something which is interesting for a dedicated business. Let's bring them in contact and see a little bit what's happening. But moreover is that we're trying also to build also joint initiatives where we said like we're going to go out and for there's a problem or there's a need or we see a chance also coming out of the business with all their expertise and all their reach into the market, where I said like that would be something to be interesting, and then going out and looking for startups which might be a good fit here and see if we can really work together. And work together means not just combining them. But what we can do then is, for instance, let's focus here on, or give an example from AgTech. If they're doing something on alternative or input technologies or sensors or something like that, we're out in the field. We do have markets, we do have fields, we do have customers, so we can go out and do trials and see if something happens and something works. And that's, I think, very interesting for startups, because usually the access is something they're lacking. And we are actually interested in looking for new products where there can be commercially a joint route to at least be observed. And if it ends up to also something which is interesting, so the startup has to develop something which BayWa can be able to pick up, that is something interesting. And the second thing is the funding. That's where we have the corporate venture vehicle in place, the BayWa Venture. The funding is a funding. It's a financial investment. So there's not a link. Is we have to do a commercial project because we're invested. And that's also, I think, need to know for cap table members and for startups that we're part of a regular funding approach, and also saying like that the startup plan or the startup business plan is something which is the most to drive forward here. But of course, it can also offer that one of the unfair advantages and the interesting factor also why it would be interesting for us to get invested is because we have, I call it like the best or one of the best options to see the commercial perspectives in a certain way, and maybe to help to bring the startups forwards in that. There's no need to be commercially active for being invested. And we also have startups where we just invested because we believe in the team and the idea and they have a good approach. But if we also see something where especially BayWa can help to bring the startup forward for its own development, of course, then also funding can be even more interesting.
Just a couple of details here. So first of all, you do investment. Do you have a structured fund, what is called the equivalent of corporate venture capital vehicle, or do you invest off balance? How does it work?
Now we do have. We don't have a fund. I don't call it a fund. We have a BayWa venture company which is fully owned by BayWa, and of this company, the investment is done usually by equity investment, typical things. We have, of course, an investment rationale and a strategic investment approach about maturity of startups, ticket sizes, and the amount of deals we can do throughout the years. But it's not as a dedicated fund, so we're doing it one by one. I think we look at each startup and see where chances, where benefits are. Also, why would we be maybe interesting for them? Well, funding wise is of course always a separate thing because we provide cash, but on the other side is maybe you also are able to bring something in which is even more interesting.
A further question here is typically at what stage of companies do you invest? Early stage, Series A equivalent, Series B? What is your typical ticket? If you have a typical ticket, you typically lead the investment or you participate in other venture capital funds led investments? How is your typical approach, if there is a typical approach?
Yeah, I would put it a little bit in brackets, but what also here we don't have 10 years funding history, so of course we have an approach, but as I said, we're not a huge fund. Also, we do it a little bit very carefully, looking at each opportunity we have. But the typical thing or the in scope for us is we're more the early stage investors are doing seed and Series A, depends on the size of the round itself. That's usually also where we might also be helping if this is proof of concept and helping the first commercial products going to market things and types of that. And the tickets in that area, I think everyone knows a little bit where they are. So they might be from $500,000 to $2 million. So it's in that size, so to say, for the entry ticket. We're happy if we feel okay with that, and also bring it up to be a lead investor at that size. But we don't have to. So there might be also we were in discussions of round where there was a great lead investor asking us if we would be able to join here. So that's also something to be considered.
So the other point that you made is that the financial investment is not subject to having a commercial agreement with BayWa. So because there are some CVCs that do invest only if there is a proof of concept pilot sign, because they want to follow up some immediate strategic opportunity. That fact tells me that you're probably, in terms of horizon of investment, you're definitely looking a bit more far ahead rather than the current business needs of the company. I'm correct?
No, absolutely. Why did I say that? I mean, the natural beneficial way, of course, for corporate maybe also for the startup would be, as you are able to maybe provide a commercial advantage for the startup. I'm also talking a lot for the advantage for the startup, and then maybe for the business, is that this would be an ideal fit. But on the other side, I think relying on that, that would eventually force you to be in a position that you're not able to pick up some innovations which are not actually close to the business. And I want to make sure we're not having a blind spot here. There might be some things where we don't have a connection to the business, but it's also too far away for us. Okay, that's a decision. But if you're able also, as you said, with the more visionary or on the horizon thing, is maybe we're one of the options to get a connection to that innovation, which then can be further maybe considered to learn, and if there's something to be applicable then for the operations. That is one of the things which also can be interesting. And the second reason why we're also not too strict on that one is, but this is more an approach type of thing. There are always concerns of startups and maybe also of cap table members that the corporates maybe then forcing the startup in a certain direction because of the commercial agreement. I think if that's a natural strategy execution for the startup, that's usually the beauty in that. But I don't want to be I don't have either my operations to do commercial things only because we're invested. They should have a natural own appetite, because that's the best proof of concept. And on the other side is, of course, the startup should also look at, say, like beyond these options. You have to do your own growth strategy. You must be able to accelerate them. So I think we're happy to evaluate this. We're happy to bring the advantages we can bring in, but we don't force anything too much in a direction in order to be able to be flexible here.
No, again, this is is a big topic I'm discussing with most of the corporates out there that have a CVC, and this is which horizon are you looking at? You know, there is Horizon 1, immediate needs, Horizon 2, not tomorrow, but something a bit later on, and Horizon 3, the day after tomorrow. And obviously, there are some CVCs that have, and then the other big question is, what's the focus, strategic or financial? This is the big question. And the beauty of this question don't have a single answer. But just to wrap it up, the debate is, on the one hand, strategic versus financial. Most of the CVC, by definition, should have a strategic goal. But the problem is that is strategic something that has an immediate impact or have a future impact? And that brings to the topic that if you want to have a strategic impact, but you are forcing, in sort of way, you're conditioning investment to some commercial immediate impact, you are at the end, you're focusing to Horizon 1, maybe Horizon 2, and you are totally forgetting Horizon 3. While if you're looking to Horizon 3, you are definitely looking at creating some future strategic value, but on the other side of the table, the big topic is how to measure that, because currently I see that corporates are more and more pressures, also from the top management, the Open Innovation Unit, to show results. And obviously, looking very, very far from today is difficult to prove any results. Yes, you are influencing the strategy of the company. It is a beautiful sentence, a beautiful vision, but at the end it's very difficult to be measured and put down on the ground. And at the end it's complicated. So it's a big debate. I'm not expecting to have an answer for you, but you gave me some solid reason why having this broad approach. I believe you are definitely probably looking at strategy, but we're looking a bit more far ahead rather than just today. Perfect. Coming down to the end of our conversation, I would like and typically ask my guests to provide, let's say, top 3 recommendation or something that you recommend to your colleagues to follow up with, and probably a couple of mistakes, something that you learned that do not work that you want to share.
Well, I think we all learn from each other. So what I'm maybe pointing out now is not only learning by BayWa, but of course also by very good colleagues and experiences I was able to share and to get involved a little bit, but also for the same thing experience out of the company. I would say one of the things, if we're talking generally about innovation, not only funding or something, but innovation in general, and then also the dedicated innovation activities. I'm not getting tired to say to my organization, but also to the world. I think there is not only one innovation approach. It's a big, as I said, it's a big headline, but I think innovation should take place. It needs to take place in multiple stages in companies, and especially talking about corporates. And having a dedicated innovation activity should not stop others to do something, but they should force everyone talking about innovation to nail it down. So what is actually the purpose of my dedicated innovation initiatives? They can also be within operations, for instance. What's the goal? What's the KPI? And why am I doing that? Because as I said, like that there might be appearance innovation, process innovation, business model innovation. So when am I successful? If I leave that to a full open point, I think you have all the freedom to act, but the burden that it's unclear when you are successful. And I think to be successful needs a certain like structuring to make sure this is our guidance, this is our scope, and in between now we have to do something, and we can have an ideation phase and a creation phase, but then we need to drive it forward in certain boundaries, and that's one of the things I really love to point out, because I think it's one of the key issues to be able to host more than one initiatives. But make sure that every initiative has an option to accelerate successfully. Same thing comes across maybe with the question of failure. I love this. There's a lot of discussion. You hear very loud outside, but also within companies. Yeah, we have to make more failure tolerance and blah 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 blah. So failure tolerance is something we all love. We all have understood. We all love. But if it comes to the failure, it's usually very difficult to say, like, not being unsatisfied, disappointed, maybe blaming, because we learn so much. If there's a failure, and the Germans translate the failure into a mistake, because the German mistake, Fehler, sounds very much like the failure. So
what's the German word?
The German word for mistake is Fehler. And that sounds very much like failure, and that's why the translation is häufig Fehlertoleranz to failure tolerance. And that's interesting, because I think you should do both without blaming people. Is about talking, is it a failure? And then it's a learning. It's like a strategy. If you analyze a strategic route, and the result of the analysis is I recommend a no action. It's a success. It's an answer. It's not, we are not on the burden that we have to find something. We should find the right answers. And the same is with a failure. If it was a good idea, we made a good progress, and it's happy. So we kill our baby with pride, but we can also look at, have we done the job good enough? And if there's a lesson learned because someone was the process was not ideal, we should also be able to pick this up. I think that's also something, and for the maybe corporates, or for all of us also, because everyone who is in the startup world, maybe the startups, also VCs, will sooner or later also run with corporates. I think something also my experience is here. There's a lot about how the corporates are acting, what these startups needs, what the VCs are thinking. I learned, I think if you have a good approach to each other, and you don't run into some specific mistake, where, for instance, dedication, or the rationale why you do something is a mixture of interest, that's always difficult. You can perfectly sit together and do something, and the awareness that there is a lot of corporates being part, either as well on the cap table as also maybe operational for the startup, there's a lot we can do together. But we have to be aware that there are different needs, and therefore sometimes the becoming clear of the expectations is crucial to avoid being unhappy with a corporation. I had very good experiences here, but the learning is of course also that there are zillions of initiatives coming from outside into to corporates, and they are having a running business to do and a set of priorities. So it's really innovation work to be done, and it's a bit of a process. And this part of learning that's a process, that's not an immediately, okay, let's just apply it to the business, is a learning for the participants in the corporates, but for the startups as well. It's not about there's not an issue about the willingness for startups to do so, but there is of course a innovative setup phase which needs to run. Last sentence. If that's landed, I learned that the teams, both the startups and the corporates, are having a lot of fun and a lot of drive in doing things like that, because it's also new to them, and they are catching up a lot of proving things, testing things, working with new, and also dealing with things which are quite unclear so far and might be something to figure out for the future. So I'm pretty confident that there's a lot of good things we can do with different partners in this area.
Totally, that's the ultimate goal, and I think that is so much needed, because if not, we probably will not be talking about open innovation, and we continue to do the old things as we were supposed to. But again, this is a new path that is becoming a more and more crowded, and that means that there are a lot of experiences that can be leveraged, shared, and this is the goal of this conversation. So really, thank you, Marion, for being with us today, and looking forward to hear from you in the coming months and quarters to see how the things are progressing at BayWa. Thank you.
Thank you very much.